The year is 1323 BCE. Dawn breaks over Thebes, and the Nile moves quietly past temple walls that promise order, balance, and divine justice. Inside those walls, however, fear travels faster than the river. A woman stands before officials who speak in the language of gods and law, but whose authority comes from silence enforced over generations. She has spoken out. Not loudly, not violently. She has questioned, resisted, or refused. And in ancient Egypt, that alone is enough to place a life in danger. This is not a story of chaos or lawlessness. It is a story of structure, of a civilization admired for its stability, its monuments, its belief in cosmic balance. Yet beneath that balance was a system that demanded obedience, especially from women.
When women disrupted that order, even with words, the consequences were designed to erase them without disorder. What followed was not always public punishment. Often it was something far more final. If you are listening to Dark Inquest history, understand this from the beginning. The past did not become powerful by accident. It was engineered. And those who challenged its design paid a price history rarely recorded. What ancient Egypt did to women who spoke out was worse than death. That is not a metaphor. It is a conclusion drawn from laws, court records, temple inscriptions, and the careful silences left behind. To understand how this system worked, we must first understand the world these women lived in.
Ancient Egypt was governed by the principle of Ma'at: order, truth, balance, harmony. Everything from the flooding of the Nile to the authority of the pharaoh was justified through this idea. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler. He was the living guarantor of cosmic stability. To challenge authority was not merely political disobedience, it was spiritual disruption. Women in Egypt are often described as unusually empowered compared to other ancient societies. They could own property, they could initiate divorce, they could appear in court. All of this is true, and all of it is incomplete. Rights existed on parchment, power existed elsewhere. Most women lived under layers of control that were informal, domestic, and therefore invisible to history. Family authority, temple authority, economic dependence, social expectation. A woman's safety was tied to her silence. Her survival depended on not disrupting the appearance of harmony. When a woman spoke out against a husband, a priest, a noble, or a state representative, she did not merely accuse an individual. She threatened the illusion that the system was just, and systems do not forgive that kind of threat. The records show this clearly. Complaints brought by women were rarely framed as claims of harm. They were reframed as disturbances. Officials asked not whether injustice occurred, but whether order had been challenged. The question was never, what was done to her? It was, why did she speak?
In many cases, women who reported mistreatment found themselves isolated from kin networks. Their testimony marked them as unstable, ungrateful, or dangerous. In a culture where social belonging was everything, isolation was not a side effect, it was the punishment. For women connected to temples or elite households, the risks were even greater. These institutions relied on reputation. A woman who exposed wrongdoing within sacred or noble spaces endangered not just individuals, but the moral image of the institution itself. The response was swift and controlled. Accusations were buried, witnesses were discouraged, and the woman was removed from visibility. Removal did not always mean execution.
That would have drawn attention. Instead, it often meant reassignment, confinement, or enforced disappearance into administrative margins. A woman could be sent to a distant estate, attached to a minor temple role, or absorbed into labor systems where her name ceased to matter. She remained alive, but her identity did not. This was worse than death in a society obsessed with memory. Ancient Egyptians believed survival after death depended on remembrance. Names carved in stone, images preserved, rituals performed. To lose one's name was to lose eternity. Women who spoke out risked exactly that. Their names vanish abruptly from records. Household lists stop. Tomb plans change. Offerings cease. These absences are not random. They follow conflict. They follow testimony. They follow moments when silence would have been easier, safer, and expected. This is where the cruelty of the system becomes clear. The punishment was not pain. It was erasure. A woman who spoke out could be condemned to live without social recognition, without protection, without the assurance that her existence would be remembered or honored. She would watch life continue around her as if she had never mattered. Midway through these stories, it becomes impossible not to reflect on why they were preserved at all. Because someone noticed the gaps. Someone questioned the silences. And that is why continuing this work with dark inquest history matters. Not as entertainment, but as an act of resistance against forgetting.
As power consolidated during the New Kingdom, these mechanisms intensified. Egypt expanded. Wealth flowed into temples. The priesthood gained influence. With expansion came anxiety. Control tightened. Deviance, especially moral or social deviance, was treated as contamination. Women who challenged authority were increasingly framed as threats to stability. Not criminals, not rebels, threats. That distinction mattered. Criminals could be punished and reintegrated. Threats had to be neutralized quietly. The legal language reflects this shift. Petitions brought by women were met with procedural delays. Hearings were postponed indefinitely. Decisions were deferred to higher authorities that never responded.
Justice was not denied outright. It was suspended until the petitioner disappeared from relevance. In domestic contexts, the pattern repeated. A woman who accused a husband or male guardian risked being labeled disruptive to household harmony. The law protected property and lineage more aggressively than individual well-being. If resolving her complaint threatened inheritance structures, her claim became inconvenient. Inconvenience was dangerous. What makes this system particularly effective is that it required no spectacle, no public cruelty, no visible terror. Fear spread through knowledge. Women learned from observation. They saw who vanished. They noticed whose names stopped being spoken. They understood the boundaries without being told. This learning shaped behavior across generations. Silence became wisdom. Endurance became virtue. Speaking out became synonymous with self-destruction, not because of what would be done openly, but because of what would be quietly taken away. The deeper injustice lies not only in what happened to these women, but in how thoroughly the system protected itself from scrutiny. Official histories celebrated order restored. They praised wise administration. They commemorated temples, not lives lost within them. Women who disrupted the narrative were edited out. Yet fragments remain, a scratched-out name, a legal papyrus with missing conclusions, a tomb hastily repurposed. These are not accidents. They are evidence of control exercised with precision. And this is only the beginning of the story. As the decades passed, the mechanisms that silenced women in ancient Egypt did not loosen, they refined themselves. What had once depended on custom and informal pressure became embedded in administration, ritual, and expectation. By the height of the New Kingdom, control no longer needed to announce itself, it was assumed. To understand this phase, we must look at how authority functioned when it was most confident. Egypt was wealthy. Victories abroad reinforced the idea that the gods favored the state. Temples expanded into economic powers. Officials managed land, labor, and belief at the same time.
In such an environment, dissent, especially from women, was treated not as a disagreement, but as a flaw in the divine order. Women who spoke out during this period were rarely accused of lying. Instead, their character was quietly questioned. Records describe them as unstable, improper, or disruptive to harmony. These were not moral judgments in the modern sense. They were administrative classifications. Once applied, they justified exclusion without requiring proof. A woman marked this way found doors closing without explanation. Access to communal rituals diminished. Family alliances weakened. Support networks dissolved. None of this required a formal decree. It happened through coordinated indifference.
The most dangerous space for a woman who spoke out was the temple complex. Temples were not only religious centers, they were employers, courts, storehouses, and political actors. Priests held immense influence, and their authority rested on the belief that they maintained ma'at on behalf of the gods. When a woman challenged a priest's conduct or questioned temple practices, the response was never framed as retaliation. It was framed as purification. Her presence was described as disruptive, her testimony as polluting. Removal was presented as necessary for sacred balance. She might be reassigned to peripheral labor, relocated to a distant sanctuary, or absorbed into service roles that stripped her of visibility.
Her voice did not need to be refuted. It needed to be contained. For women of lower status, the risks were different, but no less severe. Agricultural laborers, servants, and craft workers had little legal leverage. Speaking out against mistreatment could mean being labeled uncooperative or unreliable. In an economy dependent on labor quotas and seasonal demands, reliability was survival. Once marked as problematic, a woman could be excluded from work assignments, food rations diminished, housing arrangements changed. These were administrative adjustments, not punishments. Yet the result was the same: insecurity, dependency, and gradual disappearance from records. What is striking is how rarely violence needed to be visible.
The system relied on consequences that were slow, deniable, and devastating. A woman did not need to be publicly harmed for others to learn the lesson. They learned by watching absence accumulate. Legal documents from this period reveal patterns that are easy to miss. Complaints filed by women often lack resolutions. Names appear once and never again. In some cases, the papyrus ends abruptly, as if the matter ceased to exist. These silences are not gaps in preservation, they are outcomes. By now, the fear was internalized. Women adjusted their behavior long before conflict arose. They avoided witnesses, they softened language, they reframed suffering as duty. Speaking out became the last option, chosen only when silence had already failed to protect them.
And when that moment came, the response was rarely immediate. Delay was the weapon. Time eroded credibility. Memory faded. The woman aged, weakened, or relocated. By the time a decision arrived, if it arrived at all, the cost of speaking had already been paid. Midway through this history, it becomes clear that these systems did not survive because they were cruel. They survived because they were efficient. They removed problems without disruption. They preserved the appearance of justice while neutralizing those who demanded it. Remembering this is not about condemning the past, it is about understanding how power learns to protect itself. That is why continuing this work with Dark Inquest history is not passive viewing.
It is participation in uncovering what was designed to be forgotten. As Egypt moved toward periods of political uncertainty, these pressures intensified. When authority feels threatened, tolerance shrinks. Women who spoke out during times of transition faced even harsher outcomes, not because they were more dangerous, but because the system was more fragile. In these moments, accusations took on symbolic weight. A woman's dissent could be interpreted as an omen, her resistance as a sign of imbalance. Removing her restored confidence, not justice. There are hints of this in later inscriptions. Appeals to the gods for stability, emphasis on obedience, warnings against disorder. Women are not named in these texts, but their absence is implied.
Order is praised, disruption is condemned, the human cost is unmentioned. What makes these stories difficult is not only the suffering involved, but the way it was normalized. No villain announces themselves. No dramatic confrontation resolves the conflict. Instead, a life narrows quietly. Options vanish. Memory fades. And yet, not all traces were erased. Some women left marks in unexpected places. In poetry that speaks of confinement without naming it. In legal formulas that emphasize obedience too strongly. In tomb art where a figure is missing, replaced by symmetry. These are not accidents, they are echoes. By the later phases of ancient Egypt's long history, the punishment for women who spoke out had become so refined that it no longer needed explanation.
It was understood. Silence was not enforced through constant threat, but through memory, through generations who had watched what happened when the boundary was crossed. By this point, the system no longer reacted, it anticipated. Women learned early which words were safe and which were dangerous. They learned that truth was not judged by accuracy, but by usefulness. A statement could be correct and still be unforgivable if it disrupted hierarchy. In such an environment, speaking out was interpreted not as courage, but as disorder. This is where the phrase "worse than death" becomes historically precise. Death in ancient Egypt was not an ending, it was a transition, a structured process that promised continuation if one's name endured.
Rituals, remembrance, and burial practices were designed to secure identity beyond life. But women who challenged authority were denied that continuity while still alive. Their names were excluded from rituals. Their images were not renewed. Their participation in communal memory ceased. They existed physically, but socially they were treated as unresolved errors. This condition had consequences deeper than physical suffering. To be forgotten was to be unfinished. To be erased was to be unmade. Administrative texts from this period grow colder in tone. Language becomes abstract. People become units. Deviance becomes imbalance. When women appear, they are rarely individualized. They are categorized. Once categorized, they are manageable. A woman who spoke out might find her household reassigned, her labor redirected, her legal identity absorbed into that of a male guardian. These changes were recorded as routine adjustments. There is no indication of outrage because outrage was unnecessary. The system was operating as designed. In elite contexts, the consequences were even more controlled. Royal women, noble wives, and temple-affiliated figures lived under constant observation. Their speech carried symbolic weight. A single statement could be interpreted as dissent against the state itself. When such women spoke out, the response was often ceremonial in appearance, but devastating in effect. Titles were quietly removed. Access to court was restricted. Visibility was reduced under the pretense of propriety. They were not punished publicly, they were corrected privately. And correction, in this context, meant disappearance from influence. What is most chilling is how rarely these women appear again in historical sources, not because they ceased to exist, but because they ceased to matter to the narrative. The official story moved forward without them. Stability was preserved. Memory was edited. This editing was not random, it followed patterns. Women who complied were remembered as virtuous. Women who resisted were not remembered at all. Lower status women faced a more brutal version of the same logic.
Without lineage or titles to protect them, speaking out could result in complete social displacement. They might be transferred to labor projects far from their communities. They might lose access to food distribution networks. Their families, fearing association, might distance themselves. Again, no spectacle, no record of cruelty,
just absence accumulating until the woman's existence became administratively irrelevant. This is how fear was sustained, not through terror, but through inevitability. By now, the culture had absorbed this lesson so thoroughly that women often censored themselves before harm occurred. Silence became strategy, endurance became intelligence, survival required anticipating the system's limits and never testing them.
And yet, some still spoke. Their motivations are not recorded in detail. We infer them from context. A boundary crossed too far, a betrayal too severe, a moment when silence no longer preserved dignity. These moments mattered, even if the women themselves were erased for choosing them. The climax of this story is not a single event. It is the moment when speaking out ceased to be an act with visible consequences and became an act that erased the possibility of consequence entirely. When there was no trial to observe, no punishment to condemn, only the quiet sealing of doors. Symbolically, this is reflected in architecture: sealed chambers, restricted spaces, inner sanctums accessible only to the initiated.
These were physical representations of a society that controlled knowledge and voice with precision. When a woman spoke out, she was moved from the visible world to the interior, out of sight, out of record, out of time. This is the darkest turning point, not when harm occurred, but when harm no longer needed to announce itself. And yet, history is imperfect in its obedience. Traces remain, gaps that invite questions, abrupt changes in household composition, tombs that commemorate relationships that suddenly end, legal formulas that emphasize silence too insistently to be accidental. These traces are how we know these women existed, how we know they resisted, how we know the system reacted.
In the aftermath, ancient Egypt continued to be admired for its order. Later generations praised its stability, its art, its theology. Rarely did they ask what that stability required. The cost was absorbed into silence, passed down as tradition, forgotten as intention. But silence does not erase impact. It only delays recognition. After these women were removed from visibility, the system did not collapse. That is perhaps the most unsettling truth. Ancient Egypt continued. Crops were planted. Rituals were performed. Dynasties rose and fell. Order appeared intact. And because order remained, the cost of maintaining it was rarely questioned. The aftermath of silencing women who spoke out did not appear as public shame or reform.
It appeared as normalization. Families learned which conflicts were dangerous to acknowledge. Communities learned which stories were safer left unfinished. Over time, this restraint hardened into culture. Culture became tradition. Tradition became unquestioned truth. Official histories preserved what the state wanted remembered: victories, buildings, divine favor. They did not preserve resistance that threatened legitimacy. Women who challenged authority were not recorded as victims of injustice. They were recorded, if at all, as administrative irregularities, or they were not recorded at all. This selective memory shaped later understanding of ancient Egypt. Stability was celebrated without examining its price. Harmony was praised without acknowledging who was required to remain silent to maintain it. The absence of names was mistaken for absence of suffering. But the consequences did not end with those women. The system taught generations that survival depended on invisibility, that speaking out invited loss without recognition, that endurance was safer than truth. These lessons shaped behavior long after the original mechanisms faded. In this way, the punishment extended beyond individuals. It altered social psychology. It taught caution as virtue. It reframed silence as wisdom, and it ensured that the most effective form of control was internal. History survived not through confession, but through gaps.
Through moments where records stop explaining, through inconsistencies that suggest something was removed, not forgotten. Modern historians did not uncover these stories by finding dramatic evidence. They uncovered them by noticing what was missing. A name that should have continued, a legal case without resolution, a household record abruptly altered. These fragments, taken together, reveal a pattern too consistent to ignore. When we say that what ancient Egypt did to women who spoke out was worse than death, we are not speaking emotionally, we are speaking historically. Death in that culture promised continuity. Erasure denied it. These women were denied not only justice, but meaning. They were made to vanish while still alive.
And yet, their resistance was not meaningless. The fact that the system worked so hard to silence them is proof that their voices mattered, that order felt threatened, that truth, even when quietly spoken, carried weight. Remembering them now does not undo what was done, but it interrupts the silence that completed the punishment. It restores presence where absence was enforced. If examining what history chose not to remember matters to you, if you believe that stability built on silence deserves scrutiny, then continue this work with Dark Inquest History, not as entertainment, but as a commitment to keeping erased lives from disappearing entirely. Because the most enduring act of defiance these women are allowed now is to be remembered.